We have several members of the executive team who are here: Stephen Fetter, Rick Rouse, Erica Knisely, and Josh Lundy Whitler will be with us. Helen Blyer, who has been our lead researcher on our ALLLM Leader Survey this past year, is also here. And we have a number of other folks who are joining us, of the 30-some who are registered. We have one of our new members, Valerie Andrews, is also joining us today. So without further ado, and grateful for everyone's presence, I would invite Stephen to settle us in and to turn it over to Drs. Park and Ning.
Cool. Well, let me add to my welcome to Sarah. It's great to have you with us. We may well pick up a handful more people as we move through the next 5 minutes. Not to say that everybody comes late, but we could have a reasonable sized group. And so I'd encourage you to use the chat as your primary tool to talk to John and to Lauren, and collect the questions there, and then they can respond to them there. And we won't use the chat so much for chit chat as we will for questions, comments, things that come up, things that we'd like them to respond to. And that way we don't have to open up the mics and be disturbed by sirens and dogs barking, that kind of thing. So we're glad you're here, and thanks for joining us. And this is being recorded, and I'll have the recording posted and available through the ALLLM website within a few days. It usually takes me just a little bit to pull it all together. In the meantime, I'd like to invite you to just take a moment to pause and to think about the work that you do and the corner of the church that you serve. Think about the light that shines through your program and that brings some hope and inspiration and creativity to the people who work in the ministry that you manage and oversee and tend. And as we do that, I'd like to invite you just to join me in prayer. And as we do that, we'll light a candle and invite God into our presence too. Let us pray. Loving God, we bring thanks. We bring thanks for this way of connecting from coast to coast to coast across this whole continent. We bring thanks for the church that we serve and the ministries that we lead and the varieties of ways that we support lifelong learning and leadership within all these different branches of the church. So come be with us today. Come focus us on design and innovation. Come get us excited. Come fill us with light. Come lead us along the path. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And so, John, Lauren, over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that opening, Stephen and Sarah. And John and I are both so happy and excited to be here with all of you. I'm going to change I think I'm spotlighted now, but I like to see all you at once. So I'm going to switch to gallery view so I can see all your faces. Also, thank you, Rick, for the invitation. It's also good to put a face to the name with you, Rick. And in a moment, I'll allow John to introduce himself as well. But my name is Lauren Ng. I am ordained American Baptist clergy, went to receive my MDiv from the Berkeley School of Theology out here in California, where I'm connecting from today. Currently, used to be called the American Baptist Seminary of the West, if that rings more of a bell, but now it's Berkeley School of Theology. And now I'm pursuing my Doctor of Ministry at Central Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas, where Dr. Park and Jessica Williams are from. So thank you, Sarah, for helping me graduate a little early by calling me doctor, but not quite yet. After the current class I'm in, I'll be all but dissertation. So almost there. And my current ministry context is serving as Director of Leadership Empowerment at the American Baptist Home Mission Societies, which is the national program board for the American Baptist Churches USA. And in that work, I specifically get to work with what I call co-creators, missional entrepreneurs, people doing innovative, creative ministries outside of traditional models. And right now I'm getting ready to head out to Philadelphia next week for what we call our Shark Tank for Jesus Day, where our current cohort of co-creators will be pitching their ministry ideas to a live stream audience. So that's sort of my foray into the world of design thinking, and I'm really excited to be here today, and I'll allow John to introduce himself now.
Hello, thank you all for giving us a wonderful opportunity to make a presentation about design thinking. I'm John Park. I'm originally from South Korea. I'm first-gen South Korean who became a naturalized citizen back in 2017. I did my undergraduate as well as MDiv in South Korea. I did that in the English language program, and then I came to the United States back in 1999. So it's been about 22 plus years. I did my PhD at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, one of the Southern Baptist Convention churches that opposes women leadership and women ordination. It did come from a very conservative theological background, but then I came to Central, to fill the position of Doctor Ministry Program Director. Central is historically affiliated with ABC, American Baptist Churches. So I've been working across many theological lines and also racial lines. I'm also the paired chair of Congregational Health at Central. And I did do my PhD studies in leadership studies at Dallas Baptist University. And also, I am currently serving multiple races in terms of our students, ratio. We have a lot of students who come from Myanmar, and also some of the African countries. We also have North American country, students. So I work with students who are from a diversity of backgrounds, which is quite a joy. And the classes that I teach in, actually, let me put it back. I oversee 4 different tracks in our elective ministry program, and that is Korean Dimin program and English Dimin program in creative leadership, and also another Korean program in South Korea in conjunction with Calvin University in South Korea. And also we have a joint Dimin program with MIT, Myanmar Institute of Theology in Yangon, Myanmar. And so I teach 2 classes in the creative leadership English speaking program. The first one is leading people and organizations, and the other one is embracing design thinking. It's such a delight and joy working with students and getting to know them, getting to know their ministry backgrounds. And one of the fine students was, is and still is, and Lauren Ng, who is, nearing the completion of her studies. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. So just to give you a little idea of what the roadmap for our time together is going to look like, I'm going to get us kicked off here, and we're going to talk a little bit about what do we actually mean when we say design thinking. And I'm also going to help us try to frame it theologically, because design thinking as a practice is something that you tend to find in the for-profit secular sector. And so we're going to talk about how to frame it theologically. Then I'm going to pass it over to John. He's going to do a quick design thinking 101. Just imagine that whole course he teaches at Central condensed into like 10 minutes. So you guys are going to get fast-tracked. We'll have some time for Q&A because we're going to give you a lot of content. So we want to make sure you have a chance to respond. Then we're going to actually break you into some small groups to do some actual design thinking, some small group ideation. You will get more instructions about that. And then we'll do some report out from those small groups. Okay. And that should wrap up our time together. So I'm going to share my screen. I'd love to get some thumbs up. I can see y'all. Can you see my screen? Fantastic. Some good nods. Thank you. So this is what we mean when we say design thinking. By a show of hands, how many of you have heard the phrase design thinking before you registered for today, registered for this webinar? Oh, good. Okay, fantastic. That's a pretty good show of hands. So the way I like to explain design thinking is through stories, because I feel like that's how I learn, is through stories and illustrations. So I'm going to share those with you. So the first one is a story about people who are living with diabetics. So I have a friend who works at a design thinking firm, and one of his clients was an app developer who is developing an app that helps diabetics remember when to take their insulin. And for whatever reason, the app was out on the market. It was getting downloaded. People were using it. And then it started to users started to level off, and people weren't re-engaging with the app. So my friend's firm, design thinking firm, was hired by the app company to figure out, to get to the bottom of why the app wasn't being utilized. So they decided to apply human-centered design principles to it. And they said, let's go to the people. Let's go meet those who are living with diabetes, using the app, taking the insulin, and let's study them in their own homes and in their environments. So he tells the story of going to this one woman's house. She's a diabetic, and he was watching her use the app. And he noticed, he just kind of sat there in the living room with her and her family for a while. He noticed that when the app made its little ding sound to remind her to take her insulin, she quickly turned the phone upside down and shoved it behind her on the couch. And so he kind of thought about it, and he said, would you mind showing me where you keep your insulin? So she led him into the kitchen. She opened up the refrigerator and showed him how she keeps her insulin way in the back of the fridge behind all the other food. And he said, why do you keep your insulin? Tell me more about why you keep it in the back of the fridge. It doesn't seem very accessible. And she said, well, I don't like the visual reminder that I have diabetes. And I don't like my kids and my husband to see it either. And so then he kind of had a little aha moment and said, well, I wonder what that must feel like then, to have an app that makes a noise and lights up to remind you every so often you have diabetes, and reminds everybody in the room as well. So he was able to take that kind of data, that kind of focused research from being with the people back to his client, and they were able to redesign the app to make it more user-friendly. Another story I want to share with you is about a bank in Mexico. So there's a premier design thinking firm called IDEO, and they were working with their client was a bank in Mexico who was trying to create a savings account product for their customers. And for whatever reason was having difficulty gaining traction there. And so their conclusion as a bank, they were not a Mexican bank, they were a bank from the United States who was reaching out, branching out in Mexico. Their conclusion was that people in Mexican culture don't save money. They must not need a savings account, because nobody was coming in to open a savings account. So IDEO designers, human-centered designers, went into people's homes and started talking to them and to figure out, is it really true that they don't save money? And so they said, do you save money? And if so, how do you save it? And then they started, families started to show them, yeah, we've got a jar of money that's sitting in the pantry in the kitchen, and it was labeled quinceañera, right? And then they've got a box of some money that's underneath the bed that was labeled for, wedding anniversary. And so what the IDEO designers were able to glean is that it's not that people in Mexico don't save money, it's that they save money toward occasions, toward family celebrations. They don't save just to save, they save toward something that matters in the life of their family and culture. So they were able to go back to the bank and say, all right, what if you were to not design a savings account for sake of saving money, but you were to design a project-based savings model or savings product for your customers? And they were able to offer something that was useful. So those are two examples of what human-centered design looks like out in the real world. Design thinking is a process, a mindset, and an approach to solving complex problems. I don't want to go into this one very in much depth because John is going to do that during his portion, but I just wanted to mention here that some of the components of design thinking are an ability to empathize. You could hear that kind of implicit in the illustrations I just shared. To define the problem, to begin to ideate on some potential solutions, to design prototypes, see if it actually works out in the wild, try it, build it out of cardboard if you have to, but develop some prototypes, and then test and iterate, repeat process. So what distinguishes human-centered design from other problem-solving approaches, because we in ministry know that we've all tried our fair share of problem-solving approaches, is that human-centered design has almost an obsessive focus on understanding the perspective of the person who is experiencing the problem and understanding their needs, and then making sure you're continually circling back to make sure the solution that you've designed for them is truly meeting those needs effectively. Okay, so now you can understand why we call it human-centered design. So I promised you we'd talk about the theological perspective. Okay, and I contend that design thinking is hopeful, transformational, and incarnational. And like a good Trinitarian, I decided to choose 3 things. So hopeful, transformational, and incarnational. So first, design thinking is hopeful. All problems, design thinking is built on this understanding that all problems, even the most monumental, gigantic, complex problems, are solvable. Okay, that God has invited us as God's co-creators to use the assets and the resources God's made available to us to solve those problems. And I think there's a lot of hope in that. Design thinking also says that the people who face those problems every day are the ones who hold the key to their answer. And we could do a whole nother series on how, design thinking can help us combat colonialism and, and a colonial kind of thought, right, on saviorism, and to say, actually, you go to the people themselves. They hold the answers to the problems that they face. And I think there's a lot of hope in that as well. And then also from our faith perspective, we respond to God's invitation to solve problems as God's co-creators, which I've already kind of mentioned. And then, of course, I want to put a little scripture, be a good Baptist here. Jesus looked at them intently and said, humanly speaking, it is impossible, but with God, everything is possible. So design thinking is hopeful. Secondly, design thinking is transformational. And I can see you all taking notes, just so you know, I'll be sure we'll send our slides over to maybe Stephen, and he can share those with you also. Fine to take notes, but I don't want you to feel like you have to capture it all. Design thinking is transformational. It is concerned with meeting human needs and solving complex social problems for the common good. Okay. The process also includes failures, and those failures are revered as the work itself. And this is something that, is definitely more common thinking nowadays. In fact, one of the classes that I took with Dr. Park had me actually develop a failure resume. So I had to make a list, and keep track of some of the failures I've had in order to, not to be down on myself, but as a way of remembering that in those failures, there are learnings and opportunities for growth. And design thinking is built on failures. When I talked about prototyping and testing, you got to throw ideas up against the wall. And I always love design thinking because it's one of the few places where we actually say quantity over quality is okay. It's about throwing out as many ideas as you can, prototyping them, testing them. If they don't work, you're getting closer and closer to a potential solution. Design thinking also seeks to mobilize and empower change from within. And that's a word, right? That's a word about transformation right there. Goes back again to the people facing the problem, have the solution. And of course, this wonderful passage from Isaiah that God is always doing a new thing in the wilderness. Okay. And then finally, design thinking is incarnational. Good mission and good design results from getting close to the people. So we know this as ministry practitioners, right? That our business is the people, but it's actually amazing how often we tend to apply problem-solving processes that actually move us further away from the people, right? And we can make all kinds of decisions from the vantage point where we sit, and we can forget to be incarnational in our approach. But design thinking is about going into people's homes, going to the pews, watching them in the marketplace, following in their footsteps where life leads them and how they are experiencing the challenges they face and coming towards solutions. The business sector is often criticized for being too removed or not sufficiently embodied with the people it exists to serve. And this is one of these interesting observations I've made with my husband, who's an entrepreneur and a design thinking practitioner. And we talk about how there were all those books, and I remember some of them, but all the books that we were reading in seminary, for instance, that were all about taking principles from the business sector and applying them to ministry. Well, guess what, friends? It's happening the opposite direction now. Now you've got people in the business sector who are looking to people in the nonprofit and faith-based industry and saying, help us figure out what it means to actually be embodied with the people we exist to serve. Okay, so that's good news for us. And then the entrepreneur Emi Kalawale says, in order to get to new solutions, you have to get to know different people, different scenarios, and different places. I think it says it all. And then from Leviticus, I will walk among you, I will be your God, and you will be my people. Design thinking is incarnational. So just to, and then the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, from John. So just to wrap that up, to summarize, design thinking helps us to remain hopeful in our work, to surrender ourselves to the transformational power of God, and to practice the incarnational presence of the divine with those whom we seek to serve. Okay, so that was the theological lesson around design thinking. I'm going to stop sharing for now and pass it over to my colleague, John.
Okay, thank you for that portion of the presentation. Now I'm going to walk you through what I usually do during a trimester that runs for 12 weeks. So I hope that I'll be able to, at least provide something useful for you to take home. I want to start off with a short video. It's only 3 minutes long, maybe less than that. It's called the Little Sun Project. It began in 2012 when it designed affordable, portable solar lamps for people who live off the power grid. According to the organization, the initiative has reduced around 800,000 metric tons of carbon emissions and saved off-grid households more than $150 million in energy expenses. So let me play that short video right now. Okay, I think there's a technical glitch, so I think I'm just gonna skip that. Okay, but the gist of that video is about how this initiative actually helped the people who were off the power grid were able to have their own solar system, their own like a power in their own hands. They were able to carry it, especially at night. They were able to see the light using their own, palm-size sun. So that was
John,
very
if you want to
helpful.
send me the link, I can try to show it from my screen if you like.
I was just saying the same thing. If you have a YouTube link, you could send it here.
Put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat and I can play it from here.
Okay, actually, I prepared a separate video. So Lauren, if you could do me a favor and maybe look that up on YouTube engine, then I think we might be able to see it maybe later. So let me just go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so let me start off with this question. Where are our alums? And I think one of the recent webinars actually had, Dr. Debbie Jin discuss this very topic. And according to her stats, I remember 25% of the alums were pastors, and then about 15% of them were administrative, executive leaders and whatnot. And also there were some people who were as teachers, and about close to 10%. And also there were some associate pastors, and there were some people who were in communication, about 3%, I think. And then there were some students, and also there were about 2.5% of unemployed people. And of course, there were about 2% of retired people as well. And those are our alums. I think it is important for us to know where they are and what they are engaged in terms of what they do. So as we are working with the people who are now maybe past their the regular education ages, could be alums and could be people who are retired, could be people who are interested in lifelong learning. And as we work with them, and for example, one of you are, I know, my own colleague, Reverend Jessica Williams is the alum engagement officer. So you want to engage the people that you work with. So the question is, where are our what are our challenges, or where are our challenges and problems? And so I just came up with these statements, and some of these statements might resonate with you, and others might not resonate with you. So we can locate them. Where are our alums? And I'm pretty sure that when ATS conducted this questionnaire, I don't think everyone participated, although there's pretty good size number of people who did participate. I'm sure there are a lot of people who were left out. We can't figure out what they want when it comes to lifelong learning. They don't seem interested in what we have offered. They have reasons why they can't attend our events nor take classes that we offer. And they want to learn, but in ways that work for them, like in terms of time commitment, money matters, and methodology. And I think many more challenges. So, in a nutshell, we can engage them. How do we engage them? I think that's the question. So, there are many ways to solve problems, and one of the ways is the way of design thinking. So, Lauren said in her presentation that all problems are to be solved, with the grace and also insights and also a collaboration of many, many people working together. So there are many ways to solve problems, and design thinking is one of the ways to solve problems. So there might be some, technical problems. We don't need that much design thinking to, deal with these kinds of technical problems. But what about organizational, ministerial, and also, problems that deal with human needs, right? How do we deal with those kinds of problems? So here's the definition of design thinking. So design thinking can be defined as a discipline that uses the designer's sensibility and methods to match people's needs with what is technologically feasible and what a viable business strategy can convert into customer value and market opportunity. I know it's a mouthful. Briefly, design thinking is a problem-solving tool with business model and sustainability, something that needs to be sustained. Otherwise, it don't really work for a long period of time. And also it is human-centered, right? Human-centered. So that is why this is something that is incarnational, and this is why it invites people, it welcomes people to come and share their input, share their ideas. And so in a way, they feel a sense of community as they come together, as they engage in this design thinking projects. And also it has to be technologically feasible. That is why one of the elements of design thinking is, it has to be prototypable. You have to go to, quick prototyping, and you go through the tests, you go to the end users, you go to the people that you're trying to reach out to and ask them and test them out with those people. And you actively seek their input and incorporate that into your next iteration of changes and prototyping. So in any culture, whether it's in church settings or in your work settings, there is exploration and there is exploitation, right? I do not know how ALLLM, this organization, spends their resources, your resources on exploration and exploitation. Exploration definitely is something that you do as a way of searching, as a way of looking for something new, a different ways of doing things, right? So you experiment with new things. If you experiment with something that you might not have had experimented before, whereas exploitation is more about management. You try to define and you try to refine things so that there could be more efficiency. So design thinking in three stages. There will be inspiration. So you identify a need, you identify a problem, right? That's how you get inspired. But Lauren mentioned empathy. So we will talk about empathy in just a second. And the second part is ideation. I think this is the most important phase of this three-stage process. You have to come up with ideas that will work, ideas that actually meet the expectations as well as the needs of the end users. In our case, the lifelong learning people or students or potential students, prospective students. And also implementation. You have to implement these ideas and these ideas that you have prototyped, ideas that you have tested out, and then finally you execute the ideas. So this is the whole process. as Lauren mentioned, you start with empathize, right? You start with empathize, conduct research to develop an understanding of your users. It's very important for you to know the people. That's why it's incarnational. Just like Jesus came into the world in flesh, we need to be incarnational as we try to solve a problem. That is why you need to engage the people. You need to engage problems in a way that helps the users. Combine all your research and observe where your users' problems exist. So there is empathy, there is definition of the problem, and then there is the ideation, which is part of exploration. And then there's a prototype. You quickly build real tactile representations for a range of your ideas. And then you go to your end users, right? And you seek out their feedback. And you incorporate that feedback, their input into your process and your project. And then finally, you put the vision into effect. So this is kind of short, way of looking at how design thinking really works. And here, one question that will help you with that process is this question of how might we? So when we start with this question, how, we believe that there are ways, there are solutions to these problems. And you don't just work alone, you work with others. It's not like how might I, rather it's how might we. You invite the community to come together and share their input so that can be a community project. And also, as we are working in the context of lifelong learning, how might we really help our end users to engage what we offer or to engage lifelong learning itself? Okay, I mentioned the empathy, and these are some of the hot, potatoes these days. The first one, I don't know how many of you did watch this one, Squid Game, which topped all the Netflix charts in 90 different countries. It's a Korean movie, a Korean drama rather. There are 9 episodes, and then the one below that is a Parasite, which was the very first foreign language film to win an Oscar in Best Pictures. But the one on the right is actually what is a cultural phenomenon, not only in South Korea, but also in the whole world. I don't know whether you've heard of BTS, but I'm pretty sure that either your grandson, granddaughter, or your son or your daughter know who these, they are called BTS. And also they have broken many records, many records. And they are people who actually show a lot of empathy and also, reached out to their own people, reached out to their own fans. And they saw the birth of the genesis of a huge fandom called ARMY. So wherever they go and, produce a concert, there's a huge number of people, part of the ARMY, fandom rooting for them. But here's the thing. What made them so successful? And the word empathy is actually what made the difference. But here's the thing. These are, 2 Chinese characters. It's called Gong Gam. The first Chinese character means one. And the second Chinese character means feeling. So you become one in feelings, in emotions. Empathy is, M, which is in, and pathos, the feeling, right? So you put yourself in the shoes of others. You have walked a mile, right? With others in their shoes. So here's the thing. Unless you really put yourself in the shoes of others, unless you really become incarnational, it's very difficult for you to engage this thing called design thinking. And empathy is actually all about design thinking. It starts with empathy. It continues with empathy, and it ends with empathy. It keeps going with this, with this in mind. So as we think about design thinking, I want us to really pay attention to this word empathy. You become one with your end users. So there are three things that we need to bear in mind. The first one is desirability. When we try to ideate, right? When we try to produce ideas, these are the three things that we need to keep in mind. The first one is this idea desirable? Is this something that people really want to pursue and want to execute? Or is it something that they will not really want to do? And feasibility, is it technologically feasible? Do we have the ways to really make this happen? And viability, which has to do with finance, is it sustainable financially? So if your ideas, the ideas that you come up with, meet these three requirements, and those ideas could be really great design thinking ideas. So in just a second, we'll spend some time brainstorming around a couple of prompts that I'll give to you. And here are what IDEO, as Lauren said, the premier design thinking company says. When it comes to brainstorming, you need to remember these rules. And the first one is defer, suspend judgment. Don't say, oh, that's not gonna work. That really is bad. Don't say that, stop yourself from making judgment calls, right? Just, defer your judgment. And second, encourage wild ideas. Don't think about money. Don't think about how people would, perceive you. Just, just produce as many ideas as possible. And then stay focused on the topic, your challenge questions, okay? Sometimes you might just get off the track, but try to, focus on the topic that has been given and build on the ideas of others, right? You don't really, own your own idea. You actually let it go so that others can use it. Sometimes we become so possessive, right? But we need to allow others to build up on our own ideas. And then one conversation at a time, and then be visual, and then go for quantity. Go for quantity, not for quality, but go for quantity. These are the rules we want us to remember as we engage in a brainstorming session. So here are a couple of prompts that I came up with. The number one is, how might we overcome the fears we have in experimenting and exploring new ways of doing things for our ministry in the context of lifelong learning? And the second thing is, how might we engage our alums and others in lifelong learning? So you have about 15 minutes or so to ideate on this question. Okay, let me stop sharing.
Great, thank you. So we'll go into small groups. Can
I interrupt you for 1 second, Stephen, because I did promise in our roadmap that you would have a chance to ask some questions.
I think
so maybe we could do that first. If there's any questions you have for each other or me or John, we'll do that, and then we'll move into the breakouts.
And while we're doing that, John, could you take those questions and cut and paste them into the chat, please, so that we can see them when we get into small groups. Great, thank you. So yeah, questions, thoughts, concerns, surprises, apart from discussion about the music groups.
I've got a question.
Yes.
I'm completely befuddled on a regular basis by one of the questions that was raised a few minutes ago. And that is, how do we get information from people who do not participate, because we don't know who they are and how to get in touch with them? The program that I run, yes, it's intended to serve the graduates in our area, the alums, and not just our area, nationally, really. But we also intend to serve anybody who's a ministry professional, and we understand that broadly.
Yeah.
My big issue is, how do we get information from people who do not come to our programs when that population doesn't have clear lines around it? It's similar to the question we were asking when a number of us, Israel and Sarah and I and others, were mulling over, how do we begin to construct the landscape for lifelong learning, like where it's happening? There's no longer kind of a single bounded population responsible for this work. It's happening in a million different places, it seems. So how do we begin to use design thinking to address this particular issue?
Such a good question, Helen. And I can see other people in the chat going like, yes, me too. I have that same question. I'll invite John to respond after as well. But one of the kind of tools in the design thinking toolkit is around analogous scenarios. So what that means is you kind of think through, okay, what are some of the characteristics or components of the lifelong learning kind of offerings that we have? And what might be an analogous scenario? What might be something else that has nothing to do with theological education, nothing to do with lifelong learning, but has a similar kind of model? So for example, you know, somebody who's again, you know, developing some kind of app and is trying to figure out how to get, you know, people, you know, get people to kind of gather around the app, download it, use it. They might say, you know, an analogous scenario is we're going to go to some other type of subscription service. We're going to go to the theater that exists in the city and look at their membership, the people who buy season passes. And we want to know what makes those consumers over in this analogous scenario decide to kind of, you know, purchase a year-long or annual membership and continue to engage and re-engage and re-engage again and again and again. So that's kind of an example of analogous scenario. So it's like, instead of going to think through, well, how do I find the outliers of the people who I'm not currently accessing or connecting with, and either look at an analogous scenario or say, well, let me go study the environment where I think that they actually do exist. So if they're not coming to my offerings, where are they going? Where, if my offerings happen, you know, on weeknights, where are they going on weeknights? And go into those environments and study what is it about those environments that are so attractive, that are so appealing, that make them return again and again to there. Because it might not be that they're not wanting to do something after hours, right? It might, because that would be like the initial thought instinct would be, well, they're not coming to my, you know, 6 to 8 o'clock seminar on a Wednesday night because they're tired after a long day of work. They want to be home and they want to be watching TV and eating dinner as a family. That could be true. And using human-centered design would help reveal that, right? By finding out where they are. But it could actually be that they're out, they are out and they're out engaging in community just someplace else. And then the question would be why? Why are they there? And what's appealing about it? And how can I maybe utilize some of those? How can some of those ideas be transferable? So that would be my first kind of instinct, Helen.
Yeah, I think that's good. And also, I thought about the YouTube, you know, channels. You know, when you start off a YouTube channel, how do you really, you know, make a successful launch? When you think about it, you know, you can't really be, although there are some people with great names and, you know, great budget and they can make a huge, you know, debut with all those things, with fanfare and whatnot. And I have seen some people actually doing that. Like successful CEOs who is really well known, who has followers, right? So when we think about our own context, do we have, you know, those many followers? Maybe yes, and maybe not. And one of the things that they tell you to do is to go where the people actually show up. So you engage with what the people that you are seeking out are actually doing or engaging or showing up. For example, you actually go to their, you know, their channel and then, you know, really engage that channel or that video by making comments or making observations, or you contribute. And as you keep making contributions, not that you know, you need to do this, but, you know, I think this is just one possibility. You continue to contribute, and as your contribution increases, you know, the owner of that channel, very well-known channel, recognizes you. And then when that person mentions you, your name becomes very famous by that person. I mean, this is the one way. And also, as you keep contributing to, you know, the things that are already there, then what happens is AI, your friend, right, actually, you know, recognize that, and you pop up on, like, you know, many people's platforms somehow. And, you know, they, out of curiosity, sometimes they engage. Well, some people might choose not to engage. And I think that's one way that you can make yourself known. And I think another way might be for you to create, you know, quality work same, knowledge of YouTube. You have to continue to create quality, product. If you continue to create and persistently and consistently, then, whether you have a larger following or not, it pops up, it shows up, and so that people can check that out. But the thing is, when people come to you, do you have that quality that people are really looking for? Do you have the solution that people are looking for? When they find your videos, find what you offer engaging, and if they think that that is the answer, then they will stay and they will really engage the product that you offer, the service or the ministry that you offer. It's just an analogy that I use. Not necessarily that you start a YouTube channel, although that could be a one way. But I think that is how you could engage maybe some of the people who might not engage you and your ministry.
Any other
I hope
questions?
that kind of addresses your question a little bit.
And I love the chat.
Yeah. Yes, share your stuff, and
we can be co-collaborators and creators. There we go.
Right.
Filling in the gaps for one another.
Yeah, and if you allow me, I let me just say one more thing. I was going to say this, but I was kind of a little afraid of taking up too much time myself. I showed you BTS, that group singers. They didn't really do well at the very beginning of the they were not like a huge success from the very get-go. There were failures, right? There are a lot of failures. The first time when they went really big, they were not successful. And the second time when they went big, they changed their strategy. And that strategy was, reveal yourself, make yourself vulnerable. And how do you do that? They created videos in which they show them, they actually take them backstage and show them the kind of production, the kind of effort that they put in, some of the failures, some of the mistakes that they have made. In other words, they, take them inside their own home of studios or their own lives. There were times when they said, I don't want to sing, or I don't want to perform. And, times when they were really raw and vulnerable. And people bought into that. They felt like they were, their brothers and their own sisters. And slowly and gradually, their popularity increased. And now this fandom called ARMY, it's an amazing phenomenon, cultural phenomenon. And they show up everywhere they go. And they continue to root for them. So how do we engage our audience? I think there's got to be a way to make ourselves, known and vulnerable, and be who we are. So as you take in, the input and feedback from your own fans or your own, graduates, alums, and your own people, I think we could actually collaborate and co-create, as Lauren mentioned, with her organization. We can co-create the kind of ministry, the kind of program that we can offer to our alums.
Any other questions about what you've heard so far, or what you'll be doing in your breakouts?
Okay.
We might be ready then, Stephen.
So I think it sounds like we probably are. So I will put the discussion questions in the breakouts in the chat again. When you get into the breakout, you'll discover that you can open the chat and it'll be there waiting for you. It's the same chat that we will all see. So open it up. You will also see in your breakout that up in the top right corner, there's a countdown clock that will tell you how much longer we have. You asked for 15 minutes, and so the clock starts the moment I push the button. And I see some people are having to leave before the breakouts are done, but stick around for as much of the breakout conversation as you can. And then we'll come back together when the clock hits 0.
And do identify one person to kind of report back out when we come back.
We could, or we could just ask people to type in the chat what emerged out of the chat. I think there's that way you get more variety of responses from the breakout that way. So I'd recommend that. Anyway, great. Here we go. And John and Lauren and I, the three of us are going to stay in the main room. So
Sounds good.
I kind of need to stay in the main room just in case somebody comes in at the last minute and needs some help. And I
Yeah.
thought you two might want to touch base with each other on sort of next here.
Sounds good. Sounds
And
good.
here they come.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your time in your breakout. You know, Stephen and John and I had a really robust conversation over here in the main room. And we were just, as you were coming back into the room, discussing how, you know, these questions that we gave you are prompts, but you really just don't know what direction the Spirit's going to lead you. So I do want to open it up for y'all to put stuff in the chat if you want, but also, you know, if there's somebody from each breakout room who would be willing and able to kind of verbalize into this space some of the things that came up for you guys in your group. I don't want you to feel some kind of way about, oh my gosh, we didn't get to both questions, or we just started talking about design thinking. Hopefully you didn't just talk about K-pop the whole time, but although that would also be okay. But this is kind of how these conversations happen organically, and so we welcome any and all responses. So anyone want to share what came up for you and your peers?
We had lots of good conversation in our group, and so I'll just toss out one of the things that we shared a bit about was just that you having empathy being the entrance point for design thinking. You know, for many of us, like the idea of design thinking comes out of the corporate world. We sort of twitch about that sort of thing, but framing it theologically and having the entry point being empathy. You know, I think the comment was you really can't go too wrong when empathy is your beginning point.
Great point, Sean.
Yeah,
That's really good.
That's really nice.
Joshua, were you going to share something?
Yeah, I took some notes on behalf of our group, so I'll share. But if anybody wants to jump in, go ahead. We have Helen and Israel who have been in their positions for a while, and also Jessica, who is just now starting off in a situation and is kind of right on that ground level of getting to develop something and build something, which is really cool. And I think we mainly focused on the challenges that people face, or we might face in really just change in general, not even necessarily experimentation, but trying to implementing new programs. There was conversation about financial constraints with institutions when you're working within a broader institution, just that issue. And Helen, who just left, she mentioned that in the institution she's worked in, she has to confront this theology of scarcity that masquerades as stewardship, which I thought she really that was a really well put. This idea that again, kind of dovetailing off of that, this idea that we have to have everything right. It's kind of this theology of perfection, that you can't experiment because we can't fail, and failure is associated with not being considered financially successful from the get-go, or not getting the numbers that you're expecting to justify it, or to divert resources from another spot of the institution into this institution. And so that can cause problems, and it can cause this kind of competitiveness to the institution. Like different programs feel like they're having to compete for the same level of resources. And so on the other side, there's also just the fact that these things are very realistic concerns, and you have to deal with money. You have to live in the real world and deal with like what is actually viable. But how could we potentially get to that point where, in our institutions, we can try new things and then let go if it doesn't work? And where do you draw the line? How do you kind of do that? It's different for every institution, obviously. And but that's a line that you have to navigate, and you're having to do it from you're not depends on where your voice is valued and how you're where you're able to kind of push and where you need to kind of lay back. Like you have to play those power games within an institution. So it's everybody kind of has to kind of navigate that. But overall, can we give ourselves that permission to experiment and to try new things while also working within our institutions the way we can, and then try to find those windows where we can maybe push the ball down the field a little bit.
Yeah. That's really great, Joshua. We were talking in our, I'm sorry. Did you want to add something to that?
Yes, Adele, I'll just, our group talked about some of the same things Joshua's just named. And we also had some discussion around how do we lighten up, like around fear. So I think it's kind of building on what hasn't quite been named. But as people of faith and with empathy and a hope for what we offer in leadership to lead us into the future, we need to be about recognizing the change and the incredible shifts of nimbleness that I've certainly seen in some of the local ministry and congregations in the midst of COVID. There's been incredible stretching and creativity and collaborations. So we also need to be awake and aware and appreciating that in our colleagues as it's happening, and whether there could be some opportunities presenting in the midst of this in connecting and sharing the good work that people have done so that good ideas get passed around as well. And we don't miss that in the midst of busy schedules and the ongoing fears that may limit us. So thanks for the opportunity.
I want to
Really good
reflect on something that both Joshua and Adele and their groups have said, and I think there's still one other group we want to hear from. But I was in a session with our board of directors prior to coming into this webinar with you, and we were talking about that scarcity mindset versus a mindset of abundance, right? But how we are immersed in a system that with certain evaluative metrics by which our success versus failures are measured, and that becomes the doorway to resources and assets, right? So while we can talk about experimentation and risk-taking and throwing up quantity over quality and prototyping and testing and iterating, at the end of the day, most of the grant applications we fill out, in order to get the resources to run our programs, we'll still ask for those traditional metrics. So this is really an interesting challenge as we kind of need to, especially as communities of faith, kind of revisit or rehearse what does success look like? How do we define success? What are we actually investing in? One of the things that I tell when I kind of pitch the co-creators incubator that I work on in my context is that we're inviting people to invest in the people, not the projects, the people, not the programs. So when we get an entrepreneur who comes in and she's got a great startup venture idea and that has to shutter, she doesn't get traction, she doesn't get funding, it doesn't work. It's okay, because we didn't invest in that venture. We invested in that entrepreneur, in that co-creator, right? But it's very, very difficult, as you both and your groups have pointed out, when so many of our the access points are still kind of drenched and immersed in a different way of thinking about metrics. So yeah, really, really good. Is there another group that we haven't heard a report from?
The group that Valerie and Rick and Kathy and I were in touched on many of the same points, but we also talked about whatever interfaith, multi-faith, ecumenical faith perspective, most of our faith traditions don't value being safe, but for taking risks and trying to embody and model that within knowing that there are risks and being able to articulate why. And we highly value trying to be collaborative in referring people to other programs, understanding that there may be some times where alumni offices focus on just alumni, but lifelong learning often focuses on other learners, not only alumni? And then how do we do that in our location, whatever that is broadly? And putting, as Dr. G said, putting information where people look for it, and being creative in that approach is fun to try.
Yeah, really good. Wonderful. Anybody else want to share anything that came up for them from either your breakout rooms or anything that's been said thus far in the main session?
Kathy,
Dr.
you
G
opened your
just
mic. Did you intend to say something?
about discerning risk.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Sarah, would you repeat that?
Yeah, there's Dr. DeLinda just put a comment about understanding how to discern risk as an important factor in innovation.
Exactly. Yep. How to discern risk and define risk, and yeah, wonderful.
Yep. And it's going to be different for any institution, any person, any setting.
Right. And as we rethink, I don't know, I have these, speaking of crazy, wild ideas, I'm always like, when I talk with churches, American Baptist congregations, I'm like, what would it look like if you had a line item in your operating budget for experimentation and risk-taking and investing in ministry startups in your community? And they're like, yeah, come back to us in a little bit. But I mean, gosh, how transformative would that be, right? Yeah.
Well, and understanding our own anxieties about risk and how that affects our organizational anxiety about risk.
Yeah.
I mean, I've approached it sometimes in a little bit different way. Sometimes when I've taught my students in ministry is I take a neuroscience view. Also, of course, we're challenged by the traditional ministry view that says we've never done it that way before, so we shouldn't do it again. Right? You know, or the fear of risk that people mentioned. But I look at that. I started looking at that after I began to focus on neuroscience more. That's just someone's neural pathway. That's been shaped by years and years of teaching ministry a particular way or doing ministry in a particular way, right? So you change the pathway and you you start forming a new pathway and you prune the old one. Of course, that's easier said than done, but with my students, I've tried to work on that perspective of chipping away or pruning away at some of those older pathways, if you will, that are fear, that say we need to fear risk. We should stick with the old tried and true. That's what ministry is, you know, and all these other sayings that we've gone by. And it takes time. But when you get one or even two students who are ministry students go, okay, hadn't thought about that, then it can begin to snowball. So in the doctoral program, the DMin program that I used to run, by being in a circle and talking about these things, honestly, you begin to see that shift. So that's why I've always included neuroscience in the ministry courses in the DMin and in those that I coach, so they begin to. But I also then found I have to be around people who are quite on the edge, shall we say. I'm working with a bishop now who wants to do things that the old me would say, oh, we don't do that. So I also need to continually be reminded of new ways of thinking and let go of my own as well at the same time.
And one of the things that I share in my class is how we should observe and also spend time with people in the margin. Because, you know, a lot of people do say that creativity, innovation come from the margin. And are we paying enough attention to, you know, those people? I think that's one quick comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's a whole nother way of rewriting kind of that neural pathway, right? And I was like, John and Jessica, can we get Kathy to come do something for continuous learning at Central? Because I want to take that class. But and it's something that I know my therapist talks to me about, you know, like, think about where you are, put your feet on the ground. Are you actually where you think you are from that memory that you had a few years ago when something didn't work? or are you now in a new place, in a new setting and trying something new? And that applies to lots of things we do in ministry. It applies to, I mean, all the women here probably have similar stories about being a woman in a ministry context, where you've gone to churches or you've heard about churches, you say, oh, we're not going to call a woman. We've tried that before. And it didn't work. Right? And it's like, okay, let's think about, this is a new time, a new situation, a new scenario, but we do get locked in, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah, I got to work with a very innovative bishop in Washington, D.C. in the campus I built down there in Maryland. And here it is, a seminary working with a medical practice. It's an integrated practice. And we began teaching with their staff medical courses in the seminary for greater employability, because it qualified students for federal certifications that no normal seminarian would be able to access. And so when the accreditor came, he said, wow, you're teaching anatomy, you're teaching pharmacology in a seminary. Yeah. And so that, you know, that was nice. That was an example working as someone who was out of the box. You know, I thought I was out of the box. He's way out of the box.
Yeah, that's good. I see one of the questions, or maybe it's a question from Sean that John did respond to about, you know, in that ideation phase, can we keep saying yes, 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 until we reach the limits of the idea and have to say no? Such a good question. And John did reply and say, yeah, oftentimes you set a time, you set a clock and you say, you've got this amount of time to just quantity, quantity, quantity. And my friend who worked with the app developer for diabetics uses an exercise where he tells people in a design thinking session, I want you to come up with 101 new pizza flavors. And you're kind of going and you're going, and, you know, ones you've never heard of, like Hawaiian does not count, it has to be totally new. And you keep going, and then you kind of hit like 30 and you're like, ooh, slump. And then all of a sudden you get some innovation and you go 40, 50, 60, 70, you kind of hit another one at 80, you kind of pause. So there is an I share that to say that there's an aspect of pushing through. You set that time limit, we actually want you to push through till that time is up. And then you can kind of think through, okay, now that we've ideated, what are some of the, in fact, these are two other steps. If we had more time together today, we would have had you go back into your groups and say, now vote on one idea that you'd want to move forward. You know, you've ideated. What's one idea you want to move forward? Because you saw that in that design thinking process, define is one of the components. These are big, complex problems and challenges that we face. We're not going to solve the whole thing in one lump sum. So you kind of have to say, what corner of that problem, what tip of that challenge are we uniquely positioned to address? You define that problem, you hone it down. So we would have had you vote on one idea to move forward or one aspect of the challenge to address. And then we would have said, identify the first 2 steps toward making it actionable. Because that's another aspect, right, of design thinking, which is that testing and iterating. We can sit around and we can talk and ideate with our words for a really, really long time. But at the end of the day, when the clock is up and you begin to define the problem a little more precisely, then you go and you say, all right, what are the next 2 steps that are actionable that we're going to take? And those steps could be, we need to call somebody from another, discipline, Kathy, to your point, and hear what they might have to say about this idea or this initiative or this program. It might be that we need to take a look at our assets, or it might be that we want to go find a analogous scenario and go send a group to go study that, right? But making it actionable is key to design thinking. So we are at 1:27 my time, 4:27 Eastern. I don't know where y'all are. I don't know what time it is in Canada, Stephen, but we want to thank you, John and I both, for, again, the invitation to be here with you. We just chipped a little corner of design thinking. So if this has awakened anything in you that you'd like to discuss further, I know I speak for John as well, that both of us would be happy to have a continuing conversation with you.
So I would say you can have 30 seconds each to wrap us up and send us off excited, and then we'll turn it over to Sarah to close the meeting.
That was my wrap up, so I'll leave it to John.
Okay, there you go, John.
Yes, as Lauren said, design thinking is a process and also an approach, right? And also a mindset. So it is something that you can continue to grow with. And it doesn't just happen, God has created us to be very creative. So we need to seek to be creative as our God is the creator God.
Well, thank you both. And yeah, I think by looking at the chat, and we'll see what other kinds of feedback we get, we may well invite you to come back for a part 2 about design thinking and ideation, and how to really help put some of these kinds of shifts to work in our organization. But thank you both very much. Thank you everyone who participated in the small groups. I'm going to continue to ask, share our stuff when you get the email that says the link is up. Share it among your colleagues. Invite people to look at the web, at this recording, at the work that Lauren and John are doing, at the work some of our other presenters have done. And we hope to see you Stephen's going to put up a slide here in a minute. We have our annual meeting on November 9th, 2021 from 3 to 5 o'clock. We will conduct business that we need to conduct to stay viable as an organization, which includes electing some new officers and doing some things with bylaws and hearing some financial reports. And then we'll hear some additional work that Helen has done on our ALLLM leader survey. So we hope that we will do what we need to do, and we will continue to convene conversations that matter to providers of lifelong learning for ministry. Have a great afternoon, everyone. And I see that we've got some emails being put in the chat. Don't hesitate to reach out to other folks or to the ALLLM team. We can help connect you. If the internet doesn't, we can. Thanks all.
Thanks everyone. It was a blessing to meet you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.